Well, thank you all for being here. I am pleased to note that this is an all-female panel, and I'm not going to say anything else about that, but I'm happy about it. And we are going to be talking about ocean planning today from a variety of perspectives, and I'm just going to start off with a really quick overview. What I'm trying to point out is on the horizon, you can see the jackets, the first seal in the water in the United States of the turbines for the Deepwater Wind Farm in Rhode Island. This is a view from Block Island. And I also had showed this slide to just illustrate how happy all the, not only the developers, but also all the political leaders were that Rhode Island was the first to have a renewable energy project really moving forward. This is an up-close view of the construction and the jobs that were created. And then fast forward to this past summer, the wind carrier arrived from Europe with the turbines on board, and they quickly set about installing the turbines on the 5 steel jackets. So I had the privilege just recently to go out and see the turbines, which are really impressive as long as you don't mind getting your hair really messed up. But we are about to have the first kilowatt from any offshore renewable energy project in the United States come to land within really just the next few days. So that's really, yay! So that's really where I wanted to start today, and also just to say that now we are at the point where we have over a dozen leases along the Atlantic coast. So while this is only 5 turbines, there are a lot more that are in the pipeline. And one of the reasons I think for this is that there's been ocean plans completed recently for both the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. These were actually done with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and in parallel track to a lot of their designation of wind energy areas. But these plans were incredibly useful, and I'll show you a few examples to the developers in their choosing of different areas to put lease bids in. We also now have plans just starting on the West Coast. The first regional planning body meeting was about 10 days ago, and the Pacific Islands are also just in the early phases of starting an ocean plan. I think one of the reasons that the West Coast is well poised to do a regional plan is like the Northeast, where we had both Rhode Island and Massachusetts already had state plans. On the West Coast, both Washington and Oregon also have recently completed state plans. And that means that a lot of the stakeholders have been identified, they've been brought to the table, and a lot of the political leaders have also come to accept this as a good way forward for the blue economy. So just to show you a few of the data overlays, this is the area for the Northeast Regional Ocean Plan. This is all of the commercial vessels. And I have in the corner of each slide a logo of the key stakeholder group that actually really rolled up their sleeves, worked with the planners to ground truth the data that was being collected by the plan and put on the data portal. The American Waterways operators were really key in helping identify the tug and tow vessel density areas. As some of you know, a towed barge has a very different pattern and actually needs much greater area than a ship because it swerves. The Lobstermen Association, for example, of Massachusetts, worked on some of the commercial fishing density maps. The Audubon Society participated in the development of bird density. One little note, this spot right here, the bright red highest bird density, is also where the Cape Wind project was proposed, just maybe in part why it hasn't come to pass. And then, of course, part of the important part of the plan is the incorporation, as I said, of the wind energy areas. So we're going to hear today about ocean planning. I'm giving you just sort of the 101 overview. We're going to hear a little bit from Jennifer about what might be happening or coming in San Diego. We're also going to hear from two very important stakeholders who I think would be ultimately representing sectors that would need to be part of this plan, both aquaculture as well as offshore wind, in this case, floating offshore wind project. And then I just wanted to end by saying, we have these new uses for areas like San Diego, offshore aquaculture, offshore floating wind platforms, but there's lots of other stuff coming. And this is an example. It's a really interesting project. It's called the Natick project that's being developed by Microsoft to take these pods, which are full of servers. Their largest energy cost for the servers is cooling. So instead of having them in a warehouse out in the middle of the country, having them air conditioned, they're thinking about putting them in the ocean and putting them in strings all along the coast, because that's, of course, where all of their customers are. So my point is just that other new uses are coming that we may not have even thought about yet, and the only way that we're really going to get all the stakeholders around the table and have this be able to be planned to be both a healthy ocean as well as having it be able to be sustainably used, I think, is through ocean planning. So thank you. And yeah, that's my ocean planning slide. So now we're going to hear from Kelly Stromberg, who's representing Catalina Sea Ranch.
All right, so I'm with Catalina Sea Ranch. We are one of the first commercial aquaculture facilities in the U.S. federal waters. Federal waters meaning anything outside of 3 miles off the coast all the way out to 200 miles off the coast. Aquaculture is huge, not just as worldwide, but it's a very local concern. Right now, we import about 91% of our seafood from other countries, which leads us to have an $11 billion seafood deficit. But it's also a global concern. What you see here on this map, mostly just pay attention to the colors. The darker the red is a higher percentage of population that's malnourished. And what I want to point out on this slide is that most of those countries that have the highest percentage of malnourished population is coastal. So this just goes to prove that we aren't farming our oceans effectively to feed the world. So Catalina Sea Ranch, we're primarily a shellfish farm, meaning mussels, oysters, rock scallops, and eventually maybe also some macroalgae such as kelp, dulse, or ogo. But we're starting off with just mussels. We're still very much a startup company. This gives you a kind of a good overview picture of what we are all about. We're 6 miles located off of Long Beach or Huntington Beach area on what's called the San Pedro Shelf. And the picture on your right is kind of a diagram of how we grow mussels. We do what's called a suspension grow-out method, where on the surface, if you were to go out and see our farm, you're just going to see a couple of big floats. Where all the action is actually under the surface, about 15 to 25 feet. They'll vary depending on where we find our best growth at. And underneath that surface, you have what we call a backbone line. So essentially, it's just one long line connected to the 2 anchor lines. And then underneath that, you have what we call mussel rope or fuzzy rope. Think of just a very frayed rope with a lot of surface area. And on that rope, the mussels attach onto with what's called byssal threads. And from there, they just kind of hang out and live their life. Shellfish is a good sustainable source of seafood because we don't have to feed them. We don't have to really do that much care with them at all. We just throw them out there. They filter feed the ocean. They're also good at carbon sequestration, along with kelp and dulse and ogo once we get around to that. So yeah, best sustainable seafood source that you can get. Right now, like I had mentioned, we are very much a startup company. So we have what our 4 corner buoys, just marking our spot out there, which is what you see in this picture. And then as of last week, we actually just got in our first main crop, I guess you could call it, or seed lines that we put out. Little baby, about 2 to 3 millimeter seeds. But then we also had some experimental lines that we put out back in around July that should be coming to market here this January. So if you guys like mussels, which hopefully you do, you will hopefully start seeing them out in your restaurants and supermarkets here starting in January. So next I want to lead into what you guys probably really want to hear, which is the marine spatial planning. So the U.S. has one of the largest EEZ zones, which is an exclusive economic zone. It's about 3.4 million nautical miles of coastline that leads out to about 200 miles off the coast. So what this means is there's a lot of space out there just in the U.S. alone to expand aquaculture, wind farms, and really use the ocean for many things. If you look locally again, right here off of our coast of Long Beach and San Pedro, if you take away all the navigation zones, since it's a big shipping area, and where pipelines are, et cetera, it still leaves 26,000 acres of space located just on that shelf. This shelf is ideal for companies such as us that do mussel grow out and aquaculture, but also potentially maybe even the wind farms, since it's only 150 feet in depth before it drops off. So it also has good upwelling capabilities out there. And for the most part, it's all just muddy sediment, no rock substrate, which is important for aquaculture people being able to drill into the ground. So right there on the corner, kind of right near the shelf, you'll see Catalina Sea Ranch is located right off that drop-off. So what that does, like I said, it brings up a lot of phytoplankton, which is ideal for us. And I would like to say that we had help picking this spot, but what it really came down to was we had to find some sort of a spot that wasn't in the shipping lanes, no pipelines from the oil rigs or anything like that, and far away from the sewage outfall. And they just kind of stuck us there. We got moved around about 5 different times in this process, but lucky for us, it actually ended up being a perfect spot for us, so we'll take it. Within this 26,000 acres, though, we'd like to do more research and see what we can do to expand. Right now, we're 100 acres. But it'd be great if we could expand into like 1,000 acres, producing, that could supplant about half the imports that we bring from a little island up on the East Coast called PEI up in Canada. So that would actually lower half of our imports from them, as well as create a local sustainable seafood source here on the West Coast. So when we first got our permits from the California Coastal Commission and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, we were put forth a monitoring program that we needed to put together. We welcomed it. We think it's a great idea. So what we are doing is we are testing anything and everything almost that you could think of. We're taking benthic samples. We have sensors hanging off what's called a Nomad buoy. We're doing ROV work to double check and triple check our long lines and our anchors to make sure that there's no debris or anything like that, or an increase of shell growth that's sitting on the bottom from our farm. And we did baseline studies, so then we have, over time, a good data source of what's happening out there. From there, all of this data, what we call a Nomad buoy, which is pretty much the size of a small boat. It's about 20 by 10 by 7 feet, given to us from IOS. We have a series of sensors that can monitor in real time things like pH, dissolved oxygen, the level of chlorophyll in the water. And from there, all that goes into a Verizon signal that goes up into the cloud. So you can actually now see this, if you were to log onto your computer, see this data in real time along with a picture of what's the weather conditions out on the Nomad. And all of this is powered by solar panels, and then we also have a wind panel or a wind generator on there as well. So if you go to the website listed on the bottom, nomad.catalinasearanch.com, this is what you'll see. As you can see the picture of the Nomad, and then you can see a series of what will eventually have numbers on there. Water temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, pH, and then along with that, you can also see what's been going on over a period of time. So we're eventually going to be working with people to do more analytical work with this. Right now we're just gathering the raw data, but like I said, we're a very new company, so this is kind of all still falling into play. We also are running a series of different sensors, not just on the Nomad. These are what we call a swarm of sensors. You can put out any number of these, And what they do is you kind of see them floating up at the top, and then you can push a button, and then they dive to depth. You can set your depth, and you can also set them to hover at different depths to take recordings such as the pH, salinity, and dissolved oxygen. We also are doing our visual inspections, as I mentioned, from ROVs, so you don't have to have divers going to 150 feet. So the picture on the left is an ADCP, or current Doppler meter, so we can start programming and looking at the current in the area. And over time, how that would change once you put mussel lines in the water. Does it start going around it? Does it redirect the current flow in the water as well? And we just wanted to check, make sure everything went okay on that deployment. On the other picture, you can see we do a monthly inspection of our anchor lines. So this is just proving the anchor's still there, the chain's good, the shackle was fine. We aren't going to have any floating debris going from that. And so I feel like our company is definitely trying to work with numerous different things that are available to us as far as technology goes to ensure that not only are we monitoring our own farm, this has given us kind of a protocol of what we could do in the future at facilities such as ours. So that way we can then hopefully increase over time our farms and feed the U.S.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Zagar. I'm a partner here in San Diego at Perkins Coie. We're a national an Asian-based law firm. We were recently named the Natural Resources Practice of the Year by U.S. News & World Report, so I'm very proud of that distinction. My work focuses on energy and infrastructure siting, both on land and in the water. So I did a lot of the on-land energy and infrastructure siting work that was done in California over the past 10 years, and now have transitioned into the water, which I love because I'm a sailor and surfer, so this is like all my favorite things converging. So this is actually, let me just start with the story. When I talk about all of these issues, this is my life. I think about how much we're in a new era of infrastructure development, and when I say that, we can't take anything for granted that any of this will move forward or be approved. And I use this as a story. Could you imagine somebody said, I have a really good idea. I want to build a bridge across the most scenic part of a major U.S. city, and I'm going to paint it red. Do you think this would really happen now? And that's our Golden Gate Bridge, one of our most treasured, treasured pieces of infrastructure in the country. So we're in a new era here where, increased opposition to proposed infrastructure projects is the reality. We also have increased visibility of projects and high-profile safety incidents that may not hit in our industry, but I think create concern about any new technology that might not have the track record that people would like. You could see people say, well, if gas pipelines do this, what's going to happen with you? So, we need to be careful and cognizant of this. I will get more upbeat, I promise. And other drivers. The result is this, like I said, this is no longer business as usual. I remember when I started doing transmission lines in this state, I had this team led by engineers that had done the last round of transmission infrastructures. And when they started to see the opposition and the new atmosphere, they're like, wow, we've never experienced anything like this. So I'm not trying to start this on a downer. I think stakeholder engagement is very important, so I will get more positive, but it's something to think about. We're not going to be able to do a Mount Rushmore right now. We're not going to do a Golden Gate Bridge, and we're not going to do a PCH, Pacific Coast Highway. So what does this mean? This is the new, I think, as we all experienced yesterday, the power of the internet is quite impressive. And I think, it creates organization, communication, and fundraising platforms. And also, unfortunately, has the dissemination of a lot of bad information. So you need to keep that in mind as you deploy these new technologies, to keep on top of what's out there about your technology or your project, and deal with stakeholders one-on-one on this. This is a new one that I'm interested to see. How many people are on Nextdoor? Okay, I'm on it because if my dogs get lost, I want to find them. But this is becoming a very powerful tool in community opposition. And you can't, unless you live in the community, you can't access this platform. And I live here in San Diego in Point loma. And how many people are actually here from San Diego? The Point Loma communities is opposing changes to the FAA flight path coming out of San Diego International Airport. And watching this unfold, it's a sociology exercise for me to see how this unfolds from the inside. And it's been very interesting. But you can see, it's even bigger now. This is from a year ago. That's how many people I could access very quickly with information. So here's where I get happier. It can work. Sometimes I joke that my grandchildren would be working on some of my projects, and I haven't even had children yet. So, but I think this is critical. And this is a picture from a public meeting on a project, and I think. Good. I mean, it's very simple prospect. Good siting creates good and successful projects, particularly here on the West Coast. So I always tell my clients, engage stakeholders early and often. Create a communications plan, pay attention to social media, and incorporate that feedback into your siting from the start. And the ocean plan process is very helpful for that, but I think don't default to just an ocean plan and think it's done, because it's not. So the one thing that BOEM has instituted with a lot of success on the East Coast is the Smart from the Start process, which incorporates a lot of stakeholder feedback just to even identify the different sites where wind energy areas can be in the least amount of conflict. So I think this will be applied out here on the West Coast. But that will be very helpful. But please, as you're developing your projects or your technology, think about how you can help in that process and keep the information accurate. So I think I've hit on most of these. I think for me, I'm looking at this from an offshore wind energy or industry perspective, because I work not only on Trident, but I'm also working on one of the proposals in Hawaii. And it's really important to share the offshore wind story, share the technology story, and explain to people in simple terms. And this, I'm like, with my clients, I'm like, okay, I ask a question, I get a response, and I'm like, speak English, please. I get this, 5-minute answer that even I know the information and I'm confused. So always think about how can you talk to someone who has no idea what it is. I test this out. My husband's incredibly intelligent, but he's an artist, a painter. And if I can't explain to him, at a minimum, so he understands, we have problems. So quickly, I am going to show an example of how to start this process off really well. And so this is one of my clients, which is Trident Winds. And they have submitted an unsolicited application to BOEM off Morro Bay. And you can see where it would be off from there. And so some market drivers are that here in California, we have a pretty aggressive 50% renewable portfolio standard by 2030, which means that we need 50% of our generation to come from renewables. We also have a great, we're at a really great point with the technology readiness on the floating wind, because we have deep water applications here. And I don't want to steal the thunder of the exciting work that Principal Power and other people are doing. So I'll say, I think Kevin's talking tomorrow, so stay tuned. But, and also we have the permitting structure through the 2005 Energy Act, which clarified that BOEM has the lead agency for issuing leases in the OCS. A one side note, though, is BOEM does not have jurisdiction in marine sanctuaries, so that's something that I think we have to keep our eye out on the planning process. And then there are a whole host of state agencies that will participate as well. So in our view, Morro Bay provides a very timely solution to California market demand, not only to hit their renewables, but also develop base load in light of retirement of natural gas and nuclear facilities due to once through cooling concerns and other concerns. So I'm going to flip through these. I have a lot of slides, but I'm going to flip through these really quickly. I hit on this. We here in California, I think it will still, even though our national policy may not be as positive as it might have been, we still have a lot of policies out here in California, Oregon, and soon to be Washington that will drive this. Quickly here, we have about 11 megawatts of installed capacity in Europe, and we have a lot of lessons we can learn from that and information on impact to species from that, and I would encourage us to do that as an industry. And we are starting to see floating be rolled out in Europe as well. So quickly, here's the high wind. This is Statoil's technology. It's a floating technology. It's installed, oh, that wasn't meant to go, oh, let me go back one. Here's another one. They're working on a technology that will not include installation vessels due to limitations on using foreign vessels within the US, the Jones Act. Wind float is a very exciting technology too, because most of the assembly is on land. So it really addresses a lot of the impacts on species that have, created concerns on the East Coast with the fixed installations. And this is how they're installed, by tugboats. There's no, you saw the pictures from the East Coast and Rhode Island where they had a big crane. All this installation's on land, which is exciting and helpful. So this I'm going to flip through really quickly and your head will spin, but these are all of the so we were in a position here, we didn't have SMART from the start, driven by BOEM, because BOEM's focus was primarily on the East Coast. So the client's founder, who's a very, Alla Weinstein, is very visionary and helped start Principal Power, came in and said, now it's time to apply the technology. And she combed the California website for a site with the least conflicts and best wind potential. So obviously it starts with where is your wind resource. Here, the best wind resource is up in Northern California, but the problem is we're very constrained with transmission up there. So it's very hard to get plugged into the system up there without substantial upgrades. The Central Coast also has very good quality, but not quite as good, but has the benefit of being near load centers, so the major cities, and available transmission. So that's where, focused in on just a cut there. Southern California is difficult because the wind resource is not as good. It's right on the borderline of making offshore wind work. Is very congested with vessels, and has the islands as well and other uses. So this is just more wind resource. So this is the site that we ultimately requested. And I forget which this slide is, but you can see we're banking on the edge of the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. Although we have a lot of support from the sanctuary to continue with the project, because there's a lot of information they're going to be able to gather and a lot of interesting monitoring opportunities as a result. So they're very supportive, which is great. Here's buoy. We have a lot of buoy data, so you incorporate that as well. The mean wind speed, and I'm getting a little bit in the weeds here, but this is a really great profile because it complements onshore solar and onshore wind really well. Who's here to the duck curve? I'm always like, can I get through a presentation without? So basically, the idea is that the solar peaks midway through the day, and so you have a large peak there, but then you have mornings and evenings where solar's starting to ramp down, and so you have to have generation that ramps up where people get home, turn on their TV, start cooking dinner, and various other devices. So the offshore wind here in California provides a really great resource that balances out the grid quite a bit. And this is, you can see where solar generation spikes. It's a really great, great source to help balance our grid. So this is where we're going. The reason why we're going here, and I'm going way over, I'm sorry, I'll go really fast, is because there's transmission capacity and then distance here. We also looked at visual impacts, dominant shipping traffic, and we spoke with that industry, the abalone critical habitat. I mean, I can just keep flipping. These are all the constraints, and you can see, why we focused in on where we focused in on. Here is what keeps me up at night. Here's the first page of approvals, and this second, and then the stakeholders that we've been talking to. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Maddox. I'm with the California State Lands Commission, and I currently serve as the Executive Office's Science Advisor and Tribal Liaison. The State Lands Commission, if you're unfamiliar with the agency, is an independent commission with 3 members: the Lieutenant Governor, the State Controller, and the head of the Department of Finance, so 2 elected officials and an appointed official. And the commission, as its body, has exclusive jurisdiction over all ungranted tidelands and submerged lands from the mean high tide line to the 3-mile state-federal boundary. These lands are held in trust for the people of California for public trust consistent purposes. This dates back to English common law and ancient Roman law, the public trust doctrine, which has evolved over time through court decisions and policies, but in essence it is a common law trust doctrine that contemplates the public sovereignty of these submerged lands and the use of the ocean for water-related, waterborne, water-dependent commerce, recreation, fisheries, and then, as it has evolved over time, natural habitats and ecology. So just to give that background. What do I do? That one, okay, thank you. All right, so now bringing it down to San Diego. The Port of San Diego is a local trust grantee of sovereign lands that would normally be managed by the State Lands Commission, but through an act of the legislature has been granted the day-to-day management of certain lands within the Bay. They also have to manage these lands consistent with the public trust. And the State Lands Commission maintains sort of broad oversight of their management. So what this creates is a dual land ownership, land management structure that often is not the most efficient way to make decisions and to manage the space and to deal with users, activities, facilities, et cetera. So what we've done and what we've recently embarked on under the leadership of our 2016 chair, the controller Betty Yee, is we have entered into a partnership to strengthen our co-management of the coastal waters outside of the bay to the 3-mile limit offshore San Diego. In October, our agencies entered into a memorandum of agreement. This formalizes our collaboration and commits our agencies to developing a marine planning effort to provide us, other managers, and other decision makers with a scientifically based tool to support integrated management of the public trust resources that benefits not only the environment but also the economic health of local San Diego coastal communities and the state as a whole. So you got a little bit of this at the beginning of this panel, but this is, I thought, just kind of a cute little cartoon that kind of shows the steps. What is ecosystem-based marine spatial planning? For some people, it's a very scary word, a scary thing. For some people, it's a very exciting thing. So really what it intends to do is reflected in this excerpt from the Foley et al. Paper from 2010. And really what we are striving to do is a little bit different than what a lot of folks may be more familiar with land use planning for, zoning, general plans from a municipality, things like that. It really is actually very unique, however, and quite different because we're dealing with more dimensions. Activities can take place on the surface, in the water column, on the seafloor, and then they also may take place temporally over different times. And so we have a much more complex picture that we're looking to manage. It's really multidimensional, and what we're doing in a marine spatial planning is to try to make sense of all of this. And so, I'm not that young, so I grew up in high school where we didn't have fancy interactive whiteboards. We had the transparency machine where they would write on it with pens and all of that. So this is the way that I think about marine spatial planning. And so what we do is we've got these layers, and so I'm going to stand at my imaginary transparency doohickey from high school and put my little illustrations of activities, and then I'm going to put the next one on it, and I'm going to put the next one on it, I'm going to put the next one on it. And once you stack those all up, you're going to see a picture of where you have conflict, where you have compatibility, and where you have opportunity. And that's basically a really kind of very simplified, distilled down sense of what marine spatial planning is. What we hope to do out of this, and what you see in the sort of far right happy utopia, is that once we can visualize all of these sectors and where they come into agreement, we can make better decisions for both existing and proposed activities and infrastructure, and hopefully be a little bit more efficient and a little bit less frustrating for both conservation advocates and for industry interests. So why are we going to do this? One of the drivers for the marine spatial planning dates back to 2010 when President Obama issued Executive Order 13457. This is the executive order that established the National Ocean Policy, its companion National Ocean Council, and created 9 regional planning bodies, which I think you saw on a slide from one of the other speakers. This plan encourages ocean managers to develop comprehensive, I'm going to read it because it's long, comprehensive adaptive planning processes for existing and future uses to protect ocean, coastal, and cultural resources and protect public access while encouraging economically beneficial activities. So that is a lot, but it also fits perfectly within, and the reason I wanted to put up our emblem, this fits with perfectly within the mission of the State Lands Commission. We are a member of the West Coast Regional Planning Body and attended the meeting in Portland a couple of weeks ago. And you can see here that this San Diego pilot collaboration not only complements the national ocean policy, but it's also consistent with and furthers the goals of our recently adopted strategic plan. And that is transparency, public engagement, and science and evidence-based decision-making. All right, so we're here in San Diego. We have not set the boundaries of our pilot plan yet. We didn't want to be premature at the outset, and we wanted really sort of the ultimate 4 corners of our pilot project to be driven by our stakeholders. So, generally speaking, we intend for it to encompass the state-owned tidelands and submerged lands from the coast out to the 3 miles, and from the border with Mexico up to the border with Orange County, but that will likely be refined. It's important to note that there are already many areas of this space that are designated for specific purposes already. Some of them for Navy activities, some of them for shipping and commerce, and then some of them, like the marine protected areas, the environmentally sensitive habitat areas, and the areas of special biological significance, that's the water board's one. These are already areas that are designated for specific purposes, so these all have to go into our assessment and our planning and our evaluation and be those layers. So what we hope at the end of the day is to determine the boundaries ultimately through working with stakeholder groups, and also the decision about which sectors are going to be included or not included in the plan. Does it not like me?
Try it again.
Okay. All right, so the wrap-up slide is just kind of, thinking about what the Maritime Alliance asked us in terms of the theme of this summit is collaboration, and we really are, and with the leadership of the commissioners at the State Lands Commission, really trying to be forward-thinking and really embracing the idea of collaboration. We reject the premise that all regulation and all governance and all decision-making has to be conflict-driven and oppositional, and instead we really are seeking to find common ground, to rely heavily on the impartial arbiter, which is science, data, and evidence. Everything is fact-specific. We look to be as inclusive as possible. All of our stakeholders, from academics to environmental advocates to industry and commerce, to a lot of the companies that are here today, and also rely heavily on our commitment to environmental protection as we carry out our duties under the public trust doctrine. And with that, I thank you for listening.
Hello, I'm Martin Attrell from Plymouth University's Marine Institute. First, I'd like to have a plug for tomorrow morning's marine energy session in the panel, which is 11:30 tomorrow, following Laura's talk. But mainly I just want to address Kelly, because we're working with a private sector company off the south coast of England to develop Europe's largest offshore mussel farm. And it's been out in the field now nearly 2 years in a preliminary stage. And we're just moving up to full scale, and it's going to be about 4,000 acres when it's finally at scale. Lots of things to talk about, and perhaps we can talk afterwards about the monitoring which we're doing.
Yeah,
we'd
definitely.
very much like a boy if you've got any in a shed somewhere. But my question is, as I talk about the sort of marine spatial planning angle, how did you deal with the relationship with the fishermen? Because that was one of the key issues we had in terms of obviously removing a large area of fishing ground. But what we've noticed as part of the research we're doing, we're looking at the changes in attitudes and the socio-economic impact on the region of the farm. And we're seeing a big change in the attitudes because the farm's acting as a fish aggregating device and also collecting sort of lots of recruits for brown crab and lobsters, etc. And the fishermen are now fishing around the farm. So I'm just interested to know how your relationship developed with the fishermen and where you see it going onwards.
Yeah, good question. So anytime that you put something out with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, it has to be on a board online that for 30 days where anybody can put up any comments or concerns or whatever. And we actually got lucky. The only community, I should say, that had any negative talk about it was the squid industry, because we were taking a chunk of maybe their fishing lands. So how we addressed that was we asked for where they were fishing at and try to work with planning out an area where they didn't ever really go to get squid. As far as the recreational community goes, we actually haven't had a lot of backlash or any concerned citizens so far. That might change over time, but we are going to allow recreational fishing around our site, not within the site, because exactly like you had said, it'll act as an artificial reef essentially. We're already noticing lots of juvenile fish congregating around, and I'm sure that where small fish go, big fish go. So we're going to try to work with them versus trying to say you can't be near us. And I think that will be a good kind of relationship that will develop over time. And we're also very active on social media. So I actually even had just a random guy Facebook message us being like, I wanted to go fishing. I saw the site out there. Is it okay to go in there? Where could I fish? Am I going to get my boat or anything entangled in anything there? So I just messaged him back. I said, you're free to do like fish around the perimeter of those corner buoys that was in the presentation, but just don't go in.
Okay, thank you.
Hi there, Drew Stevens from Esri. Thanks for the excellent presentations. I'm a fan of the people component these days, and I'm just curious, Sandra, from your experience and what may be coming to San Diego, what kind of lessons are there to learn from the folks that are afraid of the marine spatial planning process, that might get spooked off, for instance, thinking they'll just get mowed over? Is the size of the chairs around the table the same size when you're getting together, is what I'm after.
Well, I like to quote Ben Franklin, who actually said, "Those who show up get to make the decisions." So I do think in the beginning, and I'm going to show a short video clip for the last couple of minutes of this presentation. In the beginning, there was a lot of trepidation. A number of stakeholders, including the commercial fishing sector, who were really afraid of this. They saw it as a way it was going to either make, it was going to make development happen fast without their input. It was going to displace them, as we heard, from their fishing grounds. However, as soon as there were actual projects being proposed, what we saw when it was no longer just theoretical, but there were projects that people knew that were coming, they realized that getting out in front and taking a sort of comprehensive, proactive approach was going to be ultimately much more beneficial. And of course, based on your ESRI hat, making sure that all of the best available data was not only collected, pulled out of people's drawers in some cases, but also made available in the data portal.
Well, thanks. So you stole my follow-up. And
Okay.
Was the information easy to get to for all the stakeholders, I suppose?
Yeah, I think, it's publicly available with the exception of proprietary data and classified data. And the way that has been dealt with is that the proprietary data in some cases is on the on the data portal, but at a different granularity than what the actual company has available, because they spend a lot of money on that. And in some cases, the classified information is available to some of the actual managers from the state and federal agencies, but not to the general public.
I can just maybe jump in with a few thoughts as well as just really beginning this pilot project in its very infancy. We have heard a lot of skepticism, and we have heard some suspicion. What's driving this? Is this about industrialization of the ocean? There have been plans that have been undertaken, specifically the Oregon Territorial Seas Plan, what really was born out of a sector-driven planning process where it was about the offshore renewable energy. In some respects, the one that is just wrapping up in Washington State was a little bit more flexible, but even that one was very heavily sort of regarded as aquaculture as a sector. And one of the advantages that I see in the pilot plan that we're seeking to develop is that we are really planning driven, and we are looking to have the stakeholders and the policy drive the process rather than having a sector drive the process. And I do believe that that's a benefit. And I think that the other benefit is to really provide a decision support tool, a decision support framework that encourages and facilitates proposing projects and activities in a place of reduced conflict at the outset, rather than spending a lot of money, a lot of resources, and a lot of energy doing some initial legwork, not because an industry is terrible and evil, but because they don't know better. But this sort of provides that leg up, and we see a lot of conflict that is born out of people having invested a lot of time and money, and so now they're kind of stuck on it. And so if we can kind of skip that step and just start in a better place at the outset. And also, I think that the one thing that has been less prominent in some of the plans that are in place already that we seek to focus on is really looking to see where do we have existing designations that are for environmental protection or for environmental function that may be not performing to the level that they might be able to perform at because we haven't identified and alleviated a multitude of stressors just because of the complexity and interaction of different facilities, outfalls, water quality, everything else. And so if we can kind of pick off some of those, we do believe that would create some buy-in and some partnerships. And so my passion is science communication and stakeholder involvement, and I can't say I'm super confident, but we're going to try.
Do we have one more question? Michael?
Hi, thanks. Sarah Giltonan, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. This is related to the last question, but I want to drill in on a specific component. In the context of new projects, emerging ocean uses like renewables, offshore and aquaculture, and marine spatial planning, I'd love to hear your insights on engaging meaningfully with stakeholders to talk about trade-offs. Not all projects and plans are perceived as win-win-win, and so how do you maybe get past that initial visceral opposition and have discussions about trade-offs at the local, regional, even national level?
Is that directed to me?
Anyone who would like to offer their insights.
Why don't you take that?
I'll take a whirl. No, this is a great point, and I want to thank BOEM for their leadership and help with this in both here in California and Hawaii. But I think what it is, a lot of it is the fear of the unknown, and once you get the right stakeholders in the room and explain the technology, explain, the benefits to the community. If the offshore wind industry takes off with its first project here in California, it will be setting the groundwork for an industry that will benefit the entire West Coast, not only from a renewable energy development, but just an economic driver. There will be a lot of new jobs, both for the construction, but also for the maintenance and down the supply chain. And all of that will have to be local for a variety of reasons. So I think, that's just one example of when you go into a community and you think, okay, listen to their concern and say, okay, let me give the information that allows you to stop fearing the unknown. Another question we get, for instance, from the environmental groups is impacts to marine mammal species, because they're looking at this as a new technology, but it's not. Most of these floating technologies are based off of oil and gas platforms that have been out there for a long time. And the cables do not present entanglement issues, for instance. But it's just doing the legwork, doing the hours of meetings, and answering their questions and focusing in on okay, here's your question. If you have the information there, great, respond. But if not, say, I will get that information and get back to you. But when they start, it's amazing when I go into these meetings, the first 5 minutes, people's arms are crossed and they're skeptical. But no, when you get them the information, they start seeing all of the benefits from a climate change perspective all the way to an industry perspective and an economic perspective. It really helps. So the key really is to share the story.
Thank you. Just to leave you with sort of an optimistic thought about stakeholder engagement, especially with the commercial fishing sector, which is so important in so many areas.
Us to hire an executive director. How it's unusual that Jeff and I get along well together. We can stand this close to each other, smile, and nobody's worrying about calling the police or anything like that.
Deepwater Wind is a development company working to build the first offshore wind farm in America. And so we're building this project off the coast of Block Island, Rhode Island. It's a 5-turbine offshore wind farm. It'll be the first in the United States.
When a project like Deepwater Wind comes along, says they want to take over a section of the ocean, we think, well, how do we fight that? What can we do? We don't own the fish. We don't own the ground. We're just out there. So we're thinking, we're going to get steamrolled.
And we're here because the state of Rhode Island engaged in an ocean planning process a number of years ago that really set the path for siting of this wind farm in this location.
Where it tries to draw all the various stakeholders together in the same place at the same time so we can all put forward our mutual interests and our mutual disagreements in a forum, and it's worked great. They chose a site at Block Island, and they said they wanted to put a certain number of windmills. They came to the industry at the Ocean SAMP, and we pointed out to them that if they moved a couple of the turbines a little bit one way or the other, it would be much less intrusive to the fishing industry. They were more than willing to do that once they checked with their engineers and found out it wasn't going to triple the price of the project or anything like that. And this allowed for those kinds of things to happen.
And so the SAMP has been a very important tool that we as developers have used to make sure that we were locating our wind farm in the right place. And so it was both a planning process and a stakeholder engagement process, which allowed us as developers to understand better the needs of the local community and understand whether this is a good place for a wind farm or not.
That's good for everybody. Good healthy fish stocks, that's good for everybody. You know, so you have to find those pieces of common ground where you can work together, and something like the ocean stamp provides that vehicle.
Thank you.
So before we break, great panel, and of course it leads beautifully into our presentation after lunch. Will McClintock is standing over in the back. The technology that they put together called C-Sketch is a way of pulling all the stakeholders together and letting them view information. It's being used in a number of places around the United States and around the world. So it'll be a great follow-on to what we just talked about.